This is Tina. We are doing a session on unconscious bias. Interesting, exciting, intriguing. Yes, that's the concept of unconscious bias. Many of you might be wondering what it really is. How does it impact me? Why did I land up here? Why am I having to do this training? And who is this woman to be able to say that she's authority to speak on unconscious bias? It's very fair. I think we will begin with my introduction so that you know who you are speaking to. And unfortunately, this is not an interactive session, or else we would have had way more fun. But nevertheless, let's try and make it interesting. You got my name already, Tina Chakrabarti. I've been in the human resources learning space for the last 22 years, 23rd year running. My bulk of experience lies in working with people. Let's leave it there. This session is all about you. So working with people, enabling people, empowering people to become successful. I am also a life coach. I am also a happiness coach. I am a Six Sigma certified professional. And among other things, I also love talking to people, especially on topics which are ambiguous, which contribute to diversity and inclusion, and that can contribute to how you live your life at your workplace, because a lot of your life is actually lived in your workplace. So that's the effort through this session. And you can read more about me if you would like to on my LinkedIn profile. But without any further ado, let's begin our session on unconscious bias. I call it a session, but let's take a step back and call this an intriguing conversation that can actually change the way you perceive people at work. So let's begin with the first unconscious bias, which might be at the back of your mind when you're looking at me on the screen right now. So let me attack that right away, and then we will jump into the presentation. She's come here to talk to us, and she's in informal clothes. Many of you have that bias. Isn't she supposed to dress up in formals in case she's doing a session? Oh my God, how can she appear formal? And there's some other people who have this unconscious bias. Oh, wow, she's so cool. She's dressed up informally. Ladies and gentlemen, these are various thought processes that you do not acknowledge actually are unconscious biases. What are these a byproduct of? These are byproducts of cultures, implanted, explanted thoughts, point of views that you've grown up with. It is education that has taught you things have to happen a certain way. It is also parents, friends, colleagues who have stereotyped presentations have to be a certain way. And if it is not certain way, then it is wrong. Welcome to the session on unconscious bias. I'm going to switch to presentation mode now. 1 second. So let's begin with the fundamental question, the elephant in the room. What is bias really? Bias, in simple dictionary terms, is an inclination or prejudice for or against one person or a group of people, especially in a way that it's considered to be unfair. Many of you have already understood the word over a period of your working experience. Bias in itself is favoring one over other. It can be at a simple act of sharing your food with some people and not with some others. It is a much more heinous act of preferring somebody to be promoted over other. It can also be the act of expecting a certain kind of behavior from some person as compared to other. Bias is ingrained in all of us. Bias is not wrong. It is a result of years and years of social conditioning. So when this is bias, what is really unconscious bias? Let's get into that. When we go into the concept of unconscious bias, the first thing that pops out to you here is understanding and acknowledging that your brain, which is a brilliant machine, is actually pretty much that runs your life, even you without acknowledging the brilliance that the brain is. Unconscious bias is our brain on autopilot, things that you do without even realizing that you're doing them. It's the knee-jerk reaction your brain makes based on information that it has accumulated over years and years of experience, good and bad trauma that you have gone through. And I say good trauma with a very clear cognizance, because when you classify something as good, even though the situation might not have worked in your favor, but since you ended up with a great feeling, you call it good experience, but actually it might still be trauma. So we are talking about knee-jerk reactions, which happen at the snap of your finger. Those are the reactions that are driven by unconscious bias. It's an unintentional bias that arrives when your brain makes snap judgments based on information it receives, and then it adds meaning to it. And where does the meaning come from? The meaning primarily comes from your experiences that you have had in the past. Let's talk about that a little bit. When we talk about experiences, what comes to your mind? When you enter your home and there is a mom present and she's going to cook a great meal for you, the bias that in your mind is that the moment I will reach home, I will get a good plate of food. And next day, when that doesn't happen, you're disappointed. Your mind goes into judgment. So unconscious bias is not wrong, and we'll talk about that in detail. Let's right now also understand how our fascinating brain works and how exactly all of this gets laid out and bias becomes ingrained so deeply that you can't even acknowledge. Your brain has determined that most of the decisions throughout the day that you take are not necessarily or life altering. For anything that is considered as routine, there is a certain system processing that is used, and anything that is exceptional, a different kind of system processing is used. So let's uncover the fascinating machine called your brain. If you see on the screen, there are two systems that are shown. There is system 1, and then there is system 2. If you realize, I'm going to take a few seconds for you to look at the screen so that you can read what's there. I spoke about the brain determining that most of the decisions throughout the day are not life-altering. So anything which is routine is used by the brain to be processed under system 1. These consider our first impressions, instinctual thinking, instinct, things that come to you very naturally. Our brain takes all that information it has on hand and it generates an immediate reaction. And this is where unconscious bias comes into play. Now, these biases are ingrained and they are perpetuated starting at a very young age. Let's use gender as an example. We identify a baby's gender by color. We promote different toys for boys versus girls to play with. Children are introduced to different sports, even if girls are introduced to sports. And then boys are promoted over girls in subject to competencies of maths, science. Boys are encouraged to be tough, while girls are expected and implored to be sweet. This can go on and on and on, and we'll talk more about this when we look at the examples of unconscious bias. Now, unfortunately, these biases are cultivated throughout our lives, and they're just not gender, and this is just not family. Society and media also play a very significant role in shaping stereotypes of gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, profession, income levels. All of these feed into our unconscious bias and form the basis of the system 1, where decisions are made instantaneously. Remember that our brain receives millions and millions of synapses and patterns. That is why some of the reactions that you see are slow and deliberate. The brain has knowingly sorted them out for more thinking. And the reason is that the brain doesn't have information from the past to process. And it requires to use the process of thinking and deliberation to take a decision. If you really classify the amount of information that the brain is using between system 1 and system 2, you will be shocked to know that 95% of the decisions are processed in system 1, and the rest is given to the wise thinking process of system 2. I'm sure that if we would have been live, there would be a lot of questions here, but nevertheless, let's move to the next section, which might be bothering you. Why does unconscious bias exist? Well, our brains are amazing, but they're not perfect and they have limitations. Unconscious bias is one of the many tactics your brain uses to free up bandwidth from your conscious brain for more important tasks. And why would that happen? Let's look at that. Let's look at what the brain is really dealing with. You need to understand this, that there are almost 11 million individual pieces of information that your brain processes per second. It's an insane amount of data. In reality, our brains are only capable of consciously capturing about 40 pieces of information per second. And from that, it really only processes 5 to 7 pieces of information. Our brain is built to understand that there is a lot of information coming in, and brain takes into account the inefficiency, and it takes shortcuts to compensate. And in order to preserve processing power for important decisions, our brain takes opportunities to bypass our consciousness. Now, think about number of things that you do on autopilot every day. Repetitive tasks like driving to work, walking around in your neighborhood, walking your dog, talking to your neighbor, typical questions, stereotype questions. Because your brain has so many potential things it could focus on, it finds every opportunity to automate certain tasks with your subconscious. So I'm repeating this for the sake of repetition, that unconscious bias fits under the broad umbrella of tactics your brain uses to free up bandwidth from your conscious brain for more important tasks. Now, let's take a minute to process this. So, okay, the unconscious bias is a way of your brain's automation tactic. Wow. Here, the whole world is moving towards automation, saving time, improving productivity. And that's how your brain is trying to really help you. But what does really happen when you give in to unconscious bias in every sphere of your life? That's a question that we'll deal in the second part of our conversation. But let's now go a little deeper. Many of you have already gone into the judgment after listening to this narrative about unconscious bias that it is wrong. Now, let me please demystify this. Unconscious bias is present for everybody. It occurs beyond your control, so it is not wrong. Our brains have learned prejudices, attitudes, categorizations. These are unplanned and inherent to all individuals living on Mother Earth. So it is not wrong. But what it is it is a way of setting back diversity and inclusion at workplace. Because of your decisions being driven by unconscious bias, it can have serious impact on how you perceive people at work, how you work with people, how you enjoy your life, how you enjoy relationships. So let's now look at how that impact really happens. I want you to close your eyes, even when you are listening to the recording. When you think of a pilot, instantaneously, what is the image comes to your mind? Is it a male or a female? When you close your eyes and you think about food, what comes to your mind? Is it an Indian cuisine or a French croissant? Close your eyes. When you're looking for recruitment and you think of a CEO, what comes to your mind, a male or a female? Close your eyes. When you're thinking of traveling abroad and staying at a place, what does a safe neighborhood look like? A neighborhood with black people or white people? Think about an adoption clinic and a baby being adopted. What comes to your mind? A male and a female adopting, or a gay couple adopting a baby? Close your eyes. Think about the American president. What comes to your mind? Black or white? These are examples of unconscious bias. And ladies and gentlemen, none of you are wrong. All of us have grown up with images of what society is and how we are going to deal with people in society and what we can expect. So next time you get into a situation where it is not expected, you fumble, you do not know how to react, and you classify people, you judge people. So let's take an example. If you had an abusive childhood and your mom beat you a lot, would you be comfortable working with a female boss? The answer many of you would say is that, yeah, of course, it doesn't matter. But ask within, all your prejudices about working with a female boss is not about gender. It is also about the behavior that you got when you're growing up. And by the way, that behavior might be all in good intention, but that can be a hesitation to work with a female boss. Let's take it a step further. If at any point in time you've had a horrible breakup with women, or you trusted women and they didn't live up to that trust or live up to that expectation, isn't it common for many of you to just avoid working with women, saying that, oh my God, that's too much trouble. Let me avoid it. Let me be safe. Same holds for women. If you had bad relationships and if you simply had some bad experiences, isn't it easy to just avoid it and move forward? It is okay till the time it's your personal choice. But when it comes to workforce, when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to preferring one person over other on promotions, it can be a serious problem. So let's look at the various kinds of biases that are there. I gave you diverse examples. Hopefully, you've been able to relate to them. But let's look at the specific biases that show up. And I'm trying to take the simplest of all, which is easiest for all of you to relate to at your workplace. There is similarity bias. I did that for a long time. More of me. People who are like me are better. I know these people, I know these animals, I know how they behave, I know how they react, so they are better. So anybody who is not like me, I will not hire, I will not work with, I will not talk to. What does it really result in? When you go into similarity bias, you create in-groups and you create out-groups. What is an in-group? An in-group is a group of people who are of similar tastes. They party together, they go out together, they work together, they celebrate together. And out-groups are people we don't understand. They are not like me. So I cannot really understand how they will react, what kind of outputs will be available at work, what kind of productivity they have, what their religious beliefs are, what their comfort zone is. I don't even want to know. So there is an in-group and there is an out-group. Then there is experience bias. I have great intuition. I know how this situation works out. I have been here before. Listen to me do this. What does this result in? You jump to conclusions. You assume, even before the situation has happened, that this is how it's going to work out. It can result in two things. You might stress out. You might stress everybody else working with you completely off their rocker, because you have concluded, oh my God, last time some last minute project had landed up on my desk and I didn't receive because the analytics team is slow, the reporting team is slow, I never got reports on time, I used my gut, I used my perception, and I then had a lot of trouble. Oh my God, what am I going to do with this? Or it can be overconfidence. I know this last time this happened also. It is a normal trend. Every year it happens in the month of November. I have handled in the past. I know what to do. Just take these 4 or 5 steps and you will be all right. While in some places it works great. But what it removes from your life is objectivity of looking at data, looking at changing situations, and then responding. Look at the pandemic response. Many organizations thought we will not require online mode of trading anymore. We will not require, what will human resources do online? What use is that? They have to come to work. There's so many beliefs that got broken during the pandemic because people were forced to look at what they had never ever experienced before. There were many even more bolder who said, oh, this virus is nothing, it will just blow over. It's not here to stay. There are many people who went ahead and started circulating posts on WhatsApp saying that, oh, just have hot water, do gargles, stay at home, you will be fine. This is a matter of just 2 months. Then there were economic gurus and pundits who went ahead and said, nothing will happen to the market, it's all right, we will recover. Look at how we are and how we are trying to recover in the situation that has left us crippled. So please be aware of experience bias. Experience is a great teacher, but unless and until you are flexible to look at new information, new data, and then draw conclusions, it can result in a very big unconscious bias and allow you to fail miserably. Then there is distance bias. There are people who work in remote locations. There are people who do not sit beside you and have lunch every day. So what happens is you neglect them. You neglect the data being provided to you. You neglect their reactions, and eventually there is attrition. And then also it results in recency factor. Somebody who is closer to you, who you are seeing work every day, who is producing results every day, is favored more over someone else who's sitting at a distance, whom you cannot interact with every day. Maybe that person is working harder just because you cannot see, you don't acknowledge. Recency factor is also another one that has a larger impact when you're doing performance management conversations. So there has been a team member who has been doing great recently, but in the past has had 4 or 5 disastrous outcomes on projects. Now, since recently the person has been doing well and it is now time for appraisal, the recency factor kicks in. And instead of looking at the whole performance graph objectively, you only see what's closer and what's more recent, as compared to somebody else who's been consistently performing throughout the year and because of some personal situation has not been able to perform great on the last project. You write that person off because now you've found this golden person who's been doing great recently. Be conscious of this unconscious bias. Then there is safety bias. And in your industry, it becomes all the more important to talk about safety bias. Everybody loves to win. So better safe than sorry. And better safe than sorry is a tagline that goes with all unconscious biases mentioned above this one. Because nobody likes to encounter a situation that you do not have experience about. Everybody likes to play safe. So what do? You go ahead and you place more importance on short term over long term. And you just ensure that as a justification to say that I always win, no matter what. What does that drive? It drives low inclusion. And when I use the word inclusion, it's not gender, it is low inclusion of possibilities that could have taken the business much further, that could have opened up avenues for people to be more productive, that could have opened up new ways of working, but you want it to be safe. So that's another bias that plays on the minds of people. Now, beyond gender bias, I did talk about gender bias a lot. I also want to directly talk to people who are managing team members. Many of you deal with pregnancy cases. Here, this is my effort of being completely gender neutral. Remember, when a new life comes into the world, the mother and the father are equally responsible for taking care of the child. When a woman comes back from maternity, many of you are very cautious about what you tell the woman. And many of you, in the goodness of your heart, go and ask, how are you doing? Are you able to cope up with the work pressure? Would you need lesser number of hours? Will you be able to handle this promotion, the one that you've been eyeing for a long time? You are a new mother. You might be doing this from the goodness of your heart, but what you really are, you are undermining the capability of a young mother who, in spite of everything, is trying to manage work, not falling short on hours, and is really competitive to get the promotion. Now ask yourself, do you ask the same questions to a male colleague? Oh, you got a baby. How are you doing? Less sleep. All right. You are ready for this promotion? Hell yes. All right. That is the difference that you don't even recognize because in your heart, you were trying to be kind to the woman. It is important for us to explore this aspect because this is very prevalent in our workplaces. Men and women have equal responsibility of taking care of children. And just because a woman takes care of the house doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot take care of the workplace also. So one of the things that I can share from my example is that I have started asking men also, how's it going at home? Do you think you can handle the new responsibilities with a new child coming in? And they look at me and they say, but I have my wife taking care of it. I said, well, isn't it time that it changed? You also took care of the children at home instead of your wife doing it alone. It becomes a very different conversation, and most of them are very grateful because they never think that way. So that's one concept that I like to bring in here in this context. And I'm not trying to say that Indians think this way, this is around the world, but this is most prevalent bias that you would experience at work. And it is your choice, and it's about time that you change that. Having said that, I also want to talk about other things that you can do to get your brain out of the way. And I say that with cognizance that brain helps us in many ways, but it comes in the way of being a fair person. So let's talk about the various things that we have mentioned here. And even before that, maybe I will take a minute to give an example of a recruitment bias. I gave an example of a gender bias in detail. Let me also give you an example of a recruitment bias. I don't know how many of recruiters would be listening to, but have a look at this, visualize this. You're looking at a resume. And there are various things written on the resume. There is a mention of project manager Google somewhere. The first thing that comes to your mind is they worked in Google. This person must be a strong candidate. That's a bias. How do you know? The next thing that comes to your mind is, he was only in Google for 3 months. Must be a good reason why they fired, because you have already concluded in your mind that working at Google is a great thing and this person is a great guy for the job. So what you need to also acknowledge here is that just the word Google can trigger so many unconscious biases in your mind. Then let us say you find somebody from Hindu college or some other college where you have studied, or let us say IIM, and you say that, oh, wow, I studied there, this guy must be very smart. Again, you have gone into a bias for this candidate over others. Just because somebody studied in IIM doesn't mean that person is creme de la creme. Then there is education. They've gone to the same school. You will say, yeah, my people. I've also studied there. They're great folks. I think that this person has a perfect advantage. And then there is stereotyping. Oh, this person went abroad to study. The person must be brilliant. These are biases that I can go on and on and on for various departments that happens. And it happens. The worst case is that it happens unconsciously. So how do you get out of it? How do you get your brain out of the way? The first thing that you need to acknowledge is that it exists. The first step of changing anything is to acknowledge that an unconscious bias exists. So the first thing you do, and I'm assuming that here we are not only talking to people on the ground, we are also talking to leaders, is making sure that the employees understand what is really stereotyping. What is the foundation of bias? Educate employees about stereotyping. This can raise awareness and keep people mindful of stereotyping behaviors and perceptions. Just like I gave you some examples, some of you might be smiling, some of you might be fast forwarding, but then these examples make you stop and think, am I doing this? Second one is about setting expectations. Let employees know that you are prioritizing bias mitigation. Talk to them, tell them that this is one thing that changes today. Begin by using relevant terminology. Make sure employees understand the company values of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Include diversity statement in your organizational values and demonstrate your commitment to diversity. Change begins from the top. Unless and until you exhibit it, nobody else can. And when you have a victory, a small victory over your unconscious bias, make sure that you share it with people that this happened. And you may not take names, but then you celebrate it. Be transparent about your hiring and promotion processes. The transparency will assure employees that these processes are not biased towards hiring and promoting based on gender, age, race, sexual orientation, or other factors. Also remember, having no unconscious bias does not mean that you start going and hiring the opposite sex immediately. It is about not having a bias towards that sex. It is about treating everybody with equal care, equal concern, and valuing merit above anything else. If you're proactively recruiting professionals from diverse backgrounds and experiences, being transparent will also build employee trust. There are many promotions that happen externally and where people are hired externally, and then there are promotions that happen internally. Most of the times, I have heard employees say, oh, we were also capable, but they never considered us. They got somebody from outside. This is a typical case of unconscious bias being implanted in the minds of those employees. So being transparent as to why we had to hire somebody from outside and why a person from inside couldn't cut the job is important. To prioritize that conversation before you drop a decision on people, and even before you drop the question on people as to why are they hiring from outside, make that very clear so that you have people aligned with you. Make leaders responsible. Ensure that the decision makers in the organization are accountable for organizational values. Just talking about diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias is not enough. Have clear criteria for evaluating qualifications and performance. Having such criteria eliminates almost all possibility that bias will have. You would have noticed that some recruitment departments have huge forms that you have to fill. But the idea is having such criteria documented right in front of your eyes to eliminate as much bias as possible. Some companies also use blind evaluation so that the employee is represented solely merit basis, only on the basis of work and not on basis of race or gender. Promote dialogue. I cannot stress it more. I spoke about communication already. Creating a culture that promotes open expression and discussion about bias is not only the education bit of it, it also builds trust. And it also allows employees to express what they think is not right. And that way, you're not only including them, you're just not, communication is not one way. So when I saw that be transparent with your conversation, it is not about simply one-way traffic that you go and say, oh, this is happening, this is why it is happening, and we think this is the best decision. That is dictatorship. When you talk about conversation, it has to be two-way. Encourage dialogue. Ask for reactions. Ask for things that the employees might think is not going well, because that can result in a different kind of an unconscious bias. Oh, they don't value us. They are not fair. They are not a fair employer. They just talk about it. So please encourage dialogue. Make meetings inclusive. Being inclusive can mean doing things as simple as valuing others' time. Beware of who you sit next to and engage with in every meeting. Ensure equal amounts of interaction with every employee. Make sure that all employees feel fully listened to and respond constructively to comments you might disagree with? How many times in a meeting we go and grab a stool or grab a chair beside a friend? How many times have you consciously gone ahead and sat with a person whom you've never spoken to before? That's really breaking out of your comfort zone. In fact, it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I've had a hard day. I haven't had time for lunch. I would prefer to go and sit with a friend instead of going and talking to somebody whom I have not interacted before. How do you know that will not add a very interesting experience to yourself? Maybe it will be liberating in interesting ways. So catch yourself when you go into your comfort zone, because comfort zone is what unconscious bias keeps you trapped in. Then, the most obvious, provide bias training. Training can benefit the entire workforce by educating people and reassuring those who feel excluded that the issue of bias is being taken care of. Offer a means for making anonymous complaints. You guys are a huge organization. I have a lot of respect for Reliance. I'm sure that there is already a system in place, but many times a system is placed just for the fact that it has to be there in place. It is not really used actively. It is not really leveraged sufficiently, and it is not spoken about enough. It is there as a checkmark activity. So please encourage people to make anonymous complaints, because that brings in a wealth of information for an organization of breaking different kind of biases that get ingrained for old traditional organizations as well as for new, because the new ones are more concerned about not having any biases in the system because they're fresh and they want to always have a vibrant startup mode. And older organizations in today's world are trying to transform themselves. It becomes all the more important for them to identify the various biases that have been ingrained in their cultural system and to break them cognitively. And last but not the least, ask for feedback. Ask people, how do they feel being treated at work? Are they comfortable in their own skin? Are they able to do things that they would like to do? Are they okay to express that they are not okay? Do they feel safe to go and talk to people? Do they feel safe in raising their voice against something they thought was not right? Or are they being drowned in your unconscious bias, even though they're standing and shouting from rooftops that this needs to change? You just choose to not listen to it because experience bias. I know it. It will just go quiet in some time. People are just screaming for no reason. So catch yourself. I'm repeating myself. The only way you will be able to deal with unconscious bias is acknowledging that it's there. Identify your own biases. Talk to friends whom you can trust and ask them that I have identified that I have this bias. What do I do about it? How can I deal with it? And that's why I say that it begins with acknowledgement. And once you identified it and you're committed to change it, there are 1 million other resources available. There is enough material available. And of course, there are human resources, folks, trainers, certified unconscious bias facilitators available whom you can talk to and break that for yourself. What we've spoken today is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of information available. There's a lot of psychological research available. There's a lot of help available to break unconscious biases for the organization. I would encourage you to actively seek out and utilize these resources, utilize trainers who are available to do bigger, larger sessions in groups for the culture of an organization to become more inclusive, for the act of breaking unconscious bias. These are the only things I had to share with you today. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I was on full screen. Okay, so that's that. That's from me to all of you. I hope you have a great time breaking unconscious bias for your organization. All the best. See you soon.